Hi, good morning, and welcome back to more Discover History here at the Keys History and Discovery Center. I'm Curator Brad Bertelli, and today we're going to talk a little bit about some of the northern keys, and specifically Porgy Key and its owner, Israel Lafayette Jones, which is a really excellent story. So again, Aaron is on the phone camera, so if you have questions, please type them in and I will answer them while we're sitting here. Otherwise, I'll get back to them later on this afternoon. So Israel Lafayette Jones was born in 1858 in Raleigh, North Carolina. There's not a lot known about his early years, or his parents for that matter, but he was probably born to the parents of slaves in North Carolina and grew up working on farmlands. In the 1880s, he decided to come down or go from the farmland to the docks and began working as a stevedore and loading and offloading cargo. And eventually hopped on a boat and came down to Florida. Originally, he was in Orlando working in the orange fields. Then there was a freeze and kind of ruined the orange crops. So he went to Tampa for a short while and then came to Key West, because pretty much every 18th or 19th century Florida Keys story at some point has a Key West connection. And while he was in Key West, he decided to move northwards and ended up in the area of Coconut Grove and working as a handyman at the Peacock Inn, which is one of the, if not the first, hotel in South Florida. While he was working as a handyman at the Peacock Inn, he also began to work as a caretaker for several of the landowners in the area in the Northern Keys. And his first, one of his first gigs was working for the Davis family, who had, I think, 500 acres of Key Biscayne. And while he was working on Key Biscayne, he had a great work ethic, and he cleared the land, built a house for the Davis family. And because of his work ethic and what a great job he did with that family, he began to branch out and became caretakers for additional islands, additional people, and overseeing pineapple farms. And then one day he visited the Sweeting family on Elliott Key, and the Sweetings had a robust pineapple farm on Elliott Key, and he was talking to them at one point and was inquiring about, maybe getting into the pineapple business himself, because it was fairly lucrative. And he inquired if anybody in the area, if the Sweetings knew if anybody in the area had land or had a pineapple farm to sell. And they told him of a man named Fletcher Alberry, who owned Porgy Key and who owned Porgy Key and had, I think, a small pineapple farm there. And Jones ended up buying Porgy Key from Fletcher Alberry for $300, which seemed a pretty reasonable rate for an island back in those days. And while he was doing his other jobs, caretaking these other farms, other pineapple farms on Totten Key and Key Biscayne and other areas, he began clearing the land. Now, one of the reasons that Porgy Key was relatively cheap was that it wasn't an Atlantic-facing island. It was kind of tucked behind Elliott and Old Roads Keys, and so it was it didn't have an ocean view. It had another island view before the ocean, so it wasn't benefited from those ocean breezes that would help with your pest control and help cool things off. And also, the island had a big ring of mangroves around it, like most of these or all these islands do. And people didn't understand, the inner beauty of the island and what was there. So Israel began clearing Porgy Key using dynamite and cutting and burning, and ended up planting both pineapples and key limes. Now, the key lime trees, in order to plant them, he did use apparently some dynamite to make bigger holes, and also and to plant those trees. But also, when he was planting the pineapples, a familiar technique, one that Aaron and I both have talked about several times in our presentations, about how these early plantations, these early farmlands, weren't all neatly in a row. But again, this comment of walking with a stick and looking for some deep area, deep enough to plant a baby pineapple sucker. And it was just very interesting that this is the third or fourth time that way of farming has come into play, which is why a lot of the farms in those days, instead of having these long regular rows of tomatoes or grapefruit trees or pineapples or whatever, they were often, kind of zigzaggy as where kind of the land would allow for a seed or a small plant to be rooted. And one of the things that Jones was really happy about with Porgy Key was that the underneath was limestone. And limestone is very beneficial when planting citrus and also tomatoes, because the limestone, when it's wet, gives off phosphorus, which is kind of like is part of vitamins for your fertilizer. Thank you. Vitamins for your soil, fertilizer to help nourish the plant. So he was really excited by that. He planted the key limes, planted the pineapples, and though the lime trees took several years before they began bearing fruit, within 2 years the pineapples had begun to bear fruit, and they began to see a profit from these pineapple fields. By about 1902, they had working farmlands. Israel and his younger brother Samuel built there'd been a house on a small house on the island they moved into, but in 1906, that was destroyed by the 1906 hurricane, and Samuel and Israel ended up making a much larger house for the family, for Moselle, Israel's wife, and also their two sons, Lancelot and Arthur, yes, it was Sir Arthur and Lancelot of Jones, who have two streets named after them up in the Biscayne area of Florida. But what's really cool about this story, because it wasn't just one island he bought. Again, this is the son of former slaves who came down with nothing in his pockets, ended up buying this first island for $300 because he'd worked really hard and gained the trust of a lot of local landowners. But he also ended up buying Old Rhodes Key. And then after the 1906 hurricane, there was a man named Budge who had the first concrete store. It was a hardware store in the Coconut Grove area, who also had a pineapple plantation and on Totten Key that had been destroyed in the 1906 hurricane. As most, it was a very large hurricane that really devastated the pineapple industry up and down the Florida Keys. So Budge ended up selling his Totten Key to Jones for, I believe it was $212. No, he sold it for more than that. But later on, in 1929, or before that, in the 1920s, Jones ended up selling part of the Totten Key. It was a 250 acre pineapple farm there. He ended up selling that for $1 an acre, or sold 212 acres of it for $1 an acre, and so so he made $250,000 on this sale. I think I got my math wrong there, but he ended up making $250,000 off the sale of this pineapple farm, I think in 1922 actually, which, if you put that in 1922 money into today's money, that will be about $6.8 million in 2021. So really went a super long way. And as Lafayette got older, he began farming less, and he did a lot of work at Mount Zion's Baptist Church in Miami, and also helped to fund a Negro school, or a school for coloreds up in St. Augustine, that would end up moving to Dade County and end up becoming, I think in 2012, was renamed Florida FMU, Florida Methodist University. Which is just a really great rags to riches story. And also his sons would end up taking over Israel Lafayette Jones died in 1932, and his sons would end up taking over the key lime industry up there. And before 1935, the Jones brothers were the largest independent key lime growers in South Florida, making in the 1930s between $30,000 and $40,000 a year just shipping out limes. Now the 1926 hurricane again destroyed a lot of the crops. Again, 1935 kind of ended the pineapple trade or the key lime trade up in those northern keys, and the Jones brothers ended up becoming really well-known fishing guides. And they ended up fishing at the Coco Lobo Club at Adams Key, which was a Carl Fisher development. And ended up, the Jones brothers ended up fishing Presidents Hoover and Lyndon B. Johnson and JFK and Nixon, and Nixon, amongst a host of other people, including the owner of the New York Yankees. But it's just a really great story. In the end, they would Lancelot Jones would end up selling his property and to the government, and ended up becoming part of a national key. Thank you. Biscayne National Park. Yes, stop me from my stuttering.
I've heard before, and I don't know if this was in reference to Israel Lafayette or his sons, that but the Jones family was the first African American millionaire in the state of Florida. Have you heard anything about that? I feel like I've heard that, but I can't be definitive about it, so I'm not going to answer. But I can look that up later. But I think I've heard, because I think he sold for $1.2 million his property, and was allowed to stay on the property until he died. So he didn't have to, once it became the national park, he was allowed to live on the island, which he did up until the last couple of years of his life, before he had to move to Miami because of his health. Due to health issues. They actually evacuated him for Hurricane Andrew.
Oh, they did?
Yeah,
so that was
he was going to leave, but that's what caused him to leave. Lancelot Jones was, the Park Service came out and would not allow him to stay. He wanted to ride out Andrew on the island. Because
it's one thing people in the Florida Keys like to do is ride out the hurricanes at home. We don't like to leave. Although once you get married and your wife tells you it's time to leave, you pack the car and you leave. But it's a great story. If you check out our Facebook page, I posted part 1 of the Israel Jones story a couple of days ago. My column is now back in the weekly again, and so that was the first story back when it came out. But it's on our Facebook page, so you can get a more concise and a less babbly version of what I just said. And then next Thursday, I'll be talking about part 2, which is give a more detailed story of Lancelot and Arthur Jones, which for some reason is getting out of my head right now. So that's our story for today. We're going to, there's no big lectures or events coming this week. So the next time we meet back again, it'll be next Tuesday here for our Discover History. And then we will be back to more great lectures coming up for the rest of the month. So I hope you guys have a great week, and thanks for tuning in, and we will talk to you again next week. Have a good day.